Okay, well, welcome. So my name's Rich Sharples. I'm with Red Hat. I'm the moderator. I manage a large chunk of the Red Hat middleware portfolio. So I'm historically a Java guy, and I generally describe myself as a recovering engineer. I used to write code for a living, but I guess people figured out I wasn't very good, so I got kind of promoted, and they wouldn't let me do that anymore, which is cool. But I do like to kind of play around with technology quite a lot, and I do still code. I just don't have the opportunity to break anything these days. So the session today is really about application development going forward. If you've been in the sessions here, or you've been to other kind of Red Hat conferences, or Gartner conferences, or Forrester conferences, everybody's talking about this digital transformation. There's a wave of change kind of bulldozing through the industry right now. And essentially every company is becoming a company dependent on technology and dependent on software. So software has to become a key skill for most organizations, and that's really what we want to talk about. So we talk about digital transformation, and what does that mean? I think what that does when we talk about digital transformation, that all really focuses down on the ability for us to develop and deliver software in a different way, to deliver faster, more secure, a better user experience, a user experience that empowers users rather than frustrates users. And we need to do all of that, yet still maintain budgets, maintain security, resilience, availability. So there are going to be increasing demands on us IT professionals to deliver software faster, and that's really what we're going to talk about today. So generally when Red Hat talks about digital transformation, it really comes down to three big areas: process, the process by which you develop the software and deliver the software; the architecture, do we need an architecture to support a different way of delivering software? So we'll dig into that. And then platform, do we need a different platform to support the architecture and the process by which we deliver software? So three big areas: process, architecture, platform. And I'll kind of group the questions around that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panel. I'll let them kind of say a few words about themselves and introduce themselves.
Hey everyone, welcome. I'm Walt Wagner. I'm a senior project manager with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, for those of you that aren't familiar with the term. I've been with them since 2009, and I'm effectively a jack of all trades. I haven't been in IT my entire career. I started out as a law enforcement officer. Now here I am back in the bowels of law enforcement again with a federal agency. But I have, during my consulting career, done lots of system integration, enterprise integration primarily with some of the suites that you typically think of: human resource information systems, CRMs, back in the days when adapters were the word. That was what you used to connect everything to a proprietary suite of some kind. Well, we're trying to get out of that world, aren't we? So we'll talk about some approaches and ways of dealing with that today. But again, welcome everybody. Look forward to the session.
Yeah, I'm Kent Eudy. I'm with Vizuri, that's the commercial division of AEM Corporation. AEM's a federal integrator. We do lots of work in this space around this IT modernization and all the new buzzwords that are going on now with the commercial clients. And we're using our knowledge that we've gained over the past few years with our commercial clients to now move into some of these emerging technologies in the federal space.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Aaron Drew, and I am a chief engineer with your United States Department of Veteran Affairs, and I'm also an IT advisor to the Secretary with respect to reducing veteran homelessness. Okay,
so we got some great experts here. So let's kind of dive in with the questions. Kind of warm up, nice soft question. So there's, you go to any dev conference or any IT conference, a lot of talk about agile software development, DevOps, Sec DevOps, automation, lots of technology in this space. But I suspect the reality is many organizations are still struggling with annual releases of software, big boom or bust software releases, manual deploys, kind of classic waterfall serialized software development. When you're trying to convince organizations to make these changes, what do you kind of talk about in respect to the contemporary ways of doing things and why they won't work in the future?
I'll reflect just a little bit on ICE. I mean, there are still lots of legacy systems out there. The last project I was associated with and I'm still working on is one to basically break out of that mold. So we're trying to inch our way into the modern development space. And I think the way we've done that in terms of legacy versus agile versus waterfall versus other approaches is to, take some baby steps in that direction. So, for example, we've got, integrated program teams across the project that basically have representatives from all the other tracks. Everybody's dealing with everybody else. Our release cycles are primarily waterfall, but we're using sprints and agile methodologies to basically get to those deliverables. So I think it is possible to inch our way into that space. You don't need to do it all at one time. And the fact of the matter is that it's such a paradigm shift that I don't think you want to try and do it all at one time, particularly not in the federal space where folks are probably a bit more resistant to change than you might think in other circles. So that's, I think, where we start.
And I see, I think you're exactly right there about take it small, take it slow. But really I see the biggest benefit in some of the traditional waterfall approaches is the agile approaches allow you to get feedback earlier in the process. You see so many times where, you spent a year and a half building this big application that's getting ready to go to production. You're in user acceptance testing, and all of a sudden the users are saying, this is not what I signed up for. Where the agile approaches allow feedback constantly and allows you to change a lot earlier in the process, which by the time you get to a user acceptance testing, well, really you're doing user acceptance testing the whole way. But by the time you're ready to deploy something, it's what you want.
I absolutely agree with that too. I think one of the things that I like about the agile process, and again, you can pick, there are several different agile methodologies, especially from a product development standpoint that we can speak to, is the fact that the functionals and the non-functionals are working together. Every step of the way, every scrum of scrums, you have the customer and you have the technical staff working together to realize a solution based upon a set of requirements, and prioritization aside. So I like the fact that we've brought the parties together, although indicative of the earlier forms of agile development. But again, it's taking hold, and especially in the Department of Veteran Affairs. I mean, we even created like 5 key functional areas to support not only agile from a product development standpoint, but also to couple it with from a project management standpoint. So that way you don't have this innovative way of building a product, but yet you have this historical legacy way of managing products and programs. And another thing that's actually befitting with that effort, I would also argue, would be even a change in our procurement strategies, leveraging more hybrid contracts as opposed to a traditional firm fixed price environment for a lot of you sellers in the room. So we see these efforts making it possible, especially within a large bureaucracy as the Department of Veteran Affairs, where this could be successful.
Yeah, that's a really good segue into the next question, which I think is highly relevant for this audience, is you all mentioned at some point the ability to kind of change direction, right? If I'm procurement, if I'm finance, or your program manager, I don't like that word. I want to know, when's it done? When's the finish? So, any kind of advice on how you kind of stay within your existing kind of norms for contracts and procurement, yet still have the ability to do sprints and potentially change direction? And you started touching on it already.
Sure. I mean, I'd probably say you have to have not only the right people, and I look out in this room and I see a lot of talented individuals, but also the processes in place. I mean, those two go hand in hand in order for success to happen with respect to delivering a product that's cost-effective, safe, secure, and delivered so in a timely manner. So I would say those two key things are critical in terms of how the message is socialized, that as an organization we're evolving. Again, we won't necessarily reference change, but we are evolving into a better way at delivering value for our customers. And in this case, my customer is the veteran and her family. So again, whatever that needs to happen to support and sustain that evolving, then that's what I'll do.
Yeah, I guess to add to that, let's face the facts. Federal space is an acquisition-centric model. We don't have our own programmers anymore. We rely on third-party suppliers to do the lion's share of the technical work. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, the folks in procurement have always worked the waterfall technology. They've always put out an RFP that had very specific requirements. They've always asked contractors for very, very, order of magnitude fixed price estimates on how long it's going to take to do that. Well, the problem with the agile approach is that you're into sprint number 2, those requirements are changing. You're into sprint number 10, they've really changed the table. Well, how do you manage a contract against the reality of the way a project is moving? So it's a complete paradigm shift for our procurement folks, and something that I think is going to require lots of co-working, lots of education, and the last project, the one we just finished, we were literally sitting down with our acquisitions folks explaining the difference between a license and a subscription. It's parlance they don't understand, and we need to basically move them along.
Actually, can I just jump in real quick? All right. That's actually a really good point. And so what I'm starting to see is maybe more flexibility and maybe in a willingness or an acceptance of statement of objectives, for example, over doing a PWS. Because maybe we don't know all that we need to know, but if we provide that latitude, then yes, from a procurement standpoint, that structure allows agile development to flourish, because we're simply saying, here are the 5 or 6 objectives I want you to meet. Now, how you go about meeting it, I leave that to the realities that will happen in the daily scrums and those scrum of scrums. You will solve those problems as you happen, but as long as you meet these 5 or 6 objectives. So I know from my point, there is a strong encouraging of leveraging more statement of objectives, more hybrid contract over the traditional way that we would do federal procurement.
I don't have much to add. These guys have covered most of it. But all I would say is start small. You got to get good at it, because your first iterations of this, your first iteration of iterations is painful, because it is such a change, and you're going to learn, and as you learn, you're going to grow. And so that would be my one advice, and the other is, you need to partner with somebody that's been there and done it. Get some advice from this out there.
Okay, so let's assume we've made progress on on agile software development and continuous delivery, continuous integration. Let's talk a little bit about architecture. What role does kind of some of the emerging ideas like microservices, huge buzzword right now. How does microservices, the ideas within microservices, help me deliver software in an agile kind of DevOps fashion?
I see microservices. You're breaking down this large application, and we've heard both of these guys talking about these big procurement processes and the big applications. Well, if you break it down into a lot of small applications, you get some really unique benefits. One of those is people. Think about what it takes for you to hire somebody, bring someone in, and they have to learn an entire application in order to know where their little piece is going to fit in and what the impact of it is. Where you could bring in someone and they can do a microservice, and they can get pretty effective right away. So that's one. People is one of the big impacts of, and then really the whole continuous integration and deployment that you hear. We'll talk about a little later.
Yeah, I think the thing about microservices at the moment, there's still a lot of white space floating around microservices. It's kind of, there are precepts out there, we've talked about it a lot. It's kind of everybody's going to roll their own for a while until we get, for example, a standard definition on the table, and there are some areas of focus established. But I think each organization, to some extent, is going to make its own decisions about where microservices are appropriate and where they aren't. I have to agree, probably one of the benefits is getting people up to speed really, really quickly, and them not having to understand the entire cosmos to be able to deliver a product.
Yeah. And again, some folks may disagree. But I see microservices be an extension of the work that was began when we embraced service-centered architecture. I mean, yeah. So we have microservices, and then at some point we'll have composite microservices, and then that leads us to another question. So who owns or manages the services? So, because as I look out into the audience, I can tell you, I'm a buyer. I am a consumer. I look to consume these services from someone. So is the idea being that the department or the government will manage services? Will the community manage services? Will OSIRA and manage services on behalf of the open source community? And then the VA and its Viper process will simply ingest those services. So who's going to be responsible for managing this library, this plethora of these atomic microservices, composite microservices, or composite of composite microservices? So there's a lot that we're going to learn, and you're absolutely right. In that white space, I'm looking for a collaborative effort for us to mutually figure this out.
Yeah, and I'm not saying anything you don't all understand already. The government has not been at the top of the heap in terms of collaborating and establishing those kinds of repositories and managing them for cross-agency consumption. So again, a paradigm shift, and we're going to have to react to that paradigm shift and build some structure that makes sense.
So Walt mentioned the kind of white space there. There's some serious detail missing in a lot of the microservices discussions. I attend lots of developer conferences where microservices is kind of really painted as the silver bullet. It's going to solve all of our software delivery problems. Being a kind of distributed computing guy, I know that's not necessarily true. So there are going to be some sharp edges. There are going to be some things to look out for. That rather than painting it as something that will solve all our problems, what are some of the downsides of adopting microservices? Go ahead.
I'd say documentation. I mean, as this thing exponentially explodes, it reminds me of, I remember Dr. Vannevar Bush and the MEMEX and the problems that we're having in his big central tenant back in 1945. There was more information out there that we could possibly process. So there's going to be more services and documentation of services that we can possibly read to get smarter. And so the next problem would be with this litany of information about things, how do we become smart about the things that are germane to what we're trying to do? So we create another problem. The first one is there is no documentation until I ask for it. And then when I ask for it, now how do I survive amongst the tidal wave of content about things?
And I see the biggest challenge with the microservices is, what is the proper size of a microservice? There's the nanoservice anti-pattern where maybe every table in your data model is a microservice. Well, that doesn't really scale. But then if you make the microservice too big, then there's other problems. So I think getting the correct size, and on top of that, I think the transition to where the service owns the data is a very tough challenge to overcome, because I see a lot of people trying to overlay microservices on top of an existing data model. And it doesn't really fly, because now you may have two microservices that are managing the same data, and really one of the tenets of a microservice is it owns the data. Yeah. So those are some challenges I've seen.
Okay, so the ideas behind microservices is, as Aaron said, some of it's not new. This is just kind of computer science has been around for decades. But can some of those ideas in microservices be applied to my existing applications, or is it purely a greenfield new application proposition?
I think to a certain extent, the way we're going to get into this is to basically attempt to apply the concept to decompose some of the services that are currently there. This is a key tenet of reuse. as you decompose some of those larger services into unit services with a very specific task, with a very specific set of data, I think reusability is going to increase as a result of that having taken place, whereas a lot of the services that are in place today are pretty specific. Yeah, I think that breakdown is basically going to be gradual, but I think it's going to be to everybody's benefit.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you can pick and choose and pull pieces out, but I think a project just to go re-architect a large application into microservices is probably doomed to fail. It's going to be very costly, and you're probably not going to get much return on your investment. Whereas if you strategically pick out pieces and gradually move over time, I think you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck.
Yeah. And not that I'm plugging one of the VAs on the projects, but that's our temp, with respect to our multi-billion-dollar electronic health record system known as VISTA. So as we're in this effort to evolve it, there are parts that we're looking at leveraging, services and microservices. I read an interesting article maybe from a year ago where they talk about the strangle vine effect. I don't know if you guys know about this thing. Yes. So as, for example, we go forward, we definitely leverage this particular architectural approach to modernizing the system. And then over time, that big monolithic behemoth will either serve a much smaller role, or much to the effect that most strangle vines do, it ends up just simply being killed off. So again, it has a value from a both brownfield and greenfield standpoint, and so we're trying to leverage that with Vista.
So it's a great point about not doing microservices for the sake of doing microservices, and we're all kind of computer geeks here, and we do like to what's it, second system effect or whatever it was called. So then if you want to convince the business that we need to go do some decomposition of an existing application, what are the kind of business metrics or goals that you think you would achieve to sell that idea of doing the work? What could we practically achieve by taking on an existing project and maybe doing a kind of first level decomposition of the services?
I think one of the things that comes to mind is to basically package that approach as part of an overall migration from proprietary middleware to open source, quite candidly, because I see the opportunity as part of the open source directive and with all the open source tools out there today to basically make the case for let's build unit components. Let's do that in a way that, we can get younger kids out of school, get them on the street faster, get them to build things, and at the same time move away from some of the really costly middleware suites that the government has typically used. I don't need to mention names. You all know what they are. We've invested in those names for years and years and years as part of the open source movement. Let's make this part of the overall approach. And I think that's basically the way you sell it with assistance from the White House and the administration.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you need to go out in industry and look at the success stories that are out there and look at the return on investments that people have had moving to these, and learn from people that have been there.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we've covered process, a little bit of architecture. We could spend hours on each of these subjects, and I want to kind of touch on platform and start talking a little bit about some of the technologies that may underlie some of these ideas. So, if you've been to any kind of conference, any tech conference, you would have heard of containers, right? Docker, Linux containers, whatever. Are containers kind of essential for microservices and this kind of agility we've talked about? What role do they play? Go ahead.
I would make the argument from a cost avoidance standpoint. So now I'm putting on my IT procurement hat, simply because, for example, the number of virtual machine instances I'd have to stand up to support the number of microservices I would hope to consume. I could save a lot of dollars, in terms of my infrastructure if I'm leveraging containers, simply because containers, unlike virtual machines that operate at the hypervisor level, this operates at the OS level. And so I can do more and build out APIs from my containers, pull the resources off of the operating system, whereas in my VM, I have to have a full OS within each virtual machine. So now I'm becoming almost a fiduciary steward of my IT resources and my existing IT infrastructure. So from an IT cost avoidance standpoint, it just makes sense to transition towards containers.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it just makes sense because it's just a natural progression. A microservices packaged in a container that's deployed. I will say one of the questions, question asked another way: do you need containers to do microservices? And the answer is no. And what we're seeing a lot of people doing is you can take the step to microservices, deploy those microservices on a traditional app server. And then at a later point, then you can make the jump into containers. So I would say that's the approach, but I would say it is the future of microservices, and today it may not be.
Just an aside here, one of the emails that came out to talk about the conference today referred to many of the participants as tech titans. I'm not one of them. So, I'm sure my colleagues have given a great explanation as to microservices and the use of containers or not. So, I bow to their expertise.
Yeah. Earlier in the discussion, we talked about this kind of nirvana of, moving from a single application, maybe a single process, a single thing to watch and monitor, and manage to be potentially hundreds of discrete smaller services. In a, kind of containerized world, I mean, how do we manage these things? What's some of the technologies, the techniques? Do we have adequate tools today to cope with that?
I think the tooling's progressing. Obviously, the containers have been around for a while. They've been around longer than they've been a buzzword. Yeah. But the frameworks like Kubernetes, and then the enterprise Kubernetes, which is OpenShift, and some of the other platforms are really getting there to where you can orchestrate these containers in a production environment. So the tooling has caught up. And I think they're making it so where containers are more of a, people have been trying out containers for the past few years, but not many people are putting them in production. These orchestration platforms are now making it to where matter of fact, I personally believe that running in containers is better than your traditional app server deployment for lots of compelling reasons.
No, absolutely great. Yeah, using Kubernetes to manage your containers created by Docker. The question is where do we evolve to from there? This is where we are today, but again, as more of us begin to embrace this idea and it becomes ubiquitous in terms of, let's say, product development or architecture development, I guess the forces in the market will push for the next best thing, or even Kubernetes may evolve to say, okay, let's tackle this new problem that has now been created, now that there is a plethora of service that either exists today or will exist maybe an hour from now.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Kind of a fairly fast-moving area. It seems like the container format, the kind of base container piece is solved. Docker, OCI as a standard. Exactly. That seems to have kind of settled down. But around the orchestration layer, we have Kubernetes, Swarm, Mesos. There's still a whole raft of technologies with a fair amount of overlap. Any thoughts on whether we're heading expecting some kind of consolidation, or do they tackle different kinds of orchestration?
I think you hit on the important concept there. The Open Container Initiative is where you got to start. Mm-hmm. So a container is a container, and so there is a spec. So as long as you start there, you do a very good job of defining what's in your containers and how you build your containers. The orchestration platforms now just provide a way of managing those in your production, well, I wouldn't say your production environment, across all your environments. As these tools progress, what's in that container doesn't change. So I would say that's what's important. So you could choose to just use pure Docker, let's say, and run Docker data center, and then tomorrow you may decide to go to OpenShift. There isn't that big of a transition between the two because your container is a container and it's going to run.
He said it better than I.
So we talk when we talk about this new way of developing software, agile, DevOps, continuous delivery, we're mostly talking in terms of delivering new features and capabilities to market to be more competitive and kind of compete in this new kind of digital world. But I suspect there's a probably even stronger reason for doing this, and that's around security. Any thoughts on how this new world that we've described can help us build more secure systems?
I would definitely say whether you are developing, designing a microservice, or you're designing an enhancement to a large monolithic system, security is from day one, or may I say maybe hour zero. It has to be baked in every step of the way that our quality process has to be there every step of the way. It can't be an afterthought. We can't do this and then decide, oh, now we need to figure out a way to apply information assurance to the adoption and consumption and the leveraging of, microservices or any type of service. So my argument is it doesn't matter that the product development processes have allowed us to produce things faster. What matters is when we wake up each morning and we go about the business of building products, that we never forget about security.
And that's a very good point. In containers, you got to be careful. There's Docker Hub, right? Lots of people put stuff on Docker Hub, and it's a big temptation to just pull anything from Docker Hub and run it. You don't know necessarily what's out there. So being able to have a container strategy that maybe relies on containers built on top of RHEL, and then you can, you're used to running RHEL and the security benefits of running RHEL. So it's just a natural extension to have your containers use that same type of technology for security purposes.
It'd also be helpful, for example, if there was an entity out there that maybe, was responsible, maybe almost an entity that gave certain services a seal of approval, a thumbs up, a courtesy. If we endorse this, and it's something that maybe, for example, me as an institutional buyer could trust, So if that would be helpful to ensure that what we're consuming, there is no hidden, malicious intent behind the service. As in, we dress it up for you to consume, but then there's malicious intent behind the scenes. But it'd be nice if there was a trusted broker that we, as on the federal side, as your large buyers, could procure and then consume and feel good about our actions.
Yeah. The only thing that I can add is, again, I'm part of DHS. We're, work for an organization that deals with law enforcement sensitive data every day. It's not unusual. Anybody in the federal workplace deals with data that needs to be just as secure as the law enforcement data that I deal with. So, for us, the integrated project teams I mentioned earlier, all of them have security representatives on them. It's baked in from day one, and it goes through the life of the project. So. A key concern for everybody that that's putting the project together, and the ultimate consumer or the users, the special agents in the field.
One thing that your comments made me think though is, so the microservices. The one nice thing you have here is, again, I mentioned it earlier, that one of the tenets of a microservice is it owns the data. So now you can think of a system, maybe information that has PII information. You can make that particular microservice more secure than other parts of your application, and you get a great benefit there because you don't have to build a high trust entire application suite. You could just run your services that require that level at a different level, and the rest of your application could be managed differently.
Yeah, it's good. I'm learning things here. This is good. So, we talked about the process, the architecture, and some of the underlying platforms and technologies. But this sounds like a fair amount of change. I think everybody's pretty much described this as a journey rather than just an endpoint. Practically everybody has to live with either legacy systems, legacy skills, people with certain knowledge, right? So just to wrap up, just some practical ideas for the audience. So how do you get started on this journey? What's a good first step?
Again, I think the first step for us was basically breaking some of what were traditionally the trusted principles of application development. And those trusted principles were you conceptually design the entire thing before you put an RFP on the street to have somebody build it. That doesn't work anymore. You take a bite at a time. You use those integrated program teams. You wire in Agile when you can, realizing that a lot of the life cycle definitions that government agencies had still haven't caught up to Agile. They're expecting certain deliverables at certain points in time. Your QA people can't buy them off. You got to deliver that stuff as well. So, you know, and I think it's baby steps. You know, the other thing obviously that, you know, we need is lots of talk at this point about goals and about open source and about, you know, the direction of the government in terms of IT. But, you know, we're still working on the how. And, you know, I think a lot of the how needs not to come from the top down, but from the bottom up. And, you know, I think it's up to us to basically make that happen.
Being a system integrator, I'd say come talk to us. I just had to throw that in. But no, I think you had really good points. Starting small, I think, is the important thing. Don't try to take on more than you can handle. You need to learn by taking small steps.
I'd say inclusion. It's so critical, inclusion between, again, your functional and your non-functional community to come together. And with that, always remembering what problem are we trying to solve? You're absolutely right. Sometimes we engage down this journey for the sake of technology, for this mere sake that the ball is shiny, and we won't even shine your ball, but forgetting why we're doing this in the first place. But if we have your functionals and your non-functionals working together, and everyone is clear, and we have consensus that we understand the problem we're trying to solve, thereby the solution that we have decided, whether it be microservices or something else, is in fact the answer to the question, then I think that success should exponentially increase.
Great. Well, you know, I'd like to thank our panelists for some fantastic answers. I'm certainly around for the rest of the day. I'm sure some of these folks are as well. So, you know, make it interactive. Come and ask us questions. And just remember, it's, you know, digital transformation, it's about, you know, the process by which we develop and deliver software, the underlying architecture, you know, do we need to, you know, break up the magnificent monoliths? And it's about a platform. You know, we may need to look at different technologies to kind of, you know, start this journey. So thanks for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day.